I hope you're well. In this one, I'm taking a look at entry-level plunge saws in late 2024. I think this is the first time I've looked at an overall category. I've looked at and compared individual saws before now, but in this one, I wanted to give a general sort of overview because there's been a bit of a change at the entry-level end of the market since I first started looking at these saws around 2017. Now I'm specifically looking at plunge saws, sometimes called track saws. Funny story about that name, I'll tell you later. Not circular saws that are guide rail compatible. If you're not sure of the difference, then the Tracksaw Workshop series of videos explains it all in great detail. But in brief, with a plunge saw, you set the depth of cut you want on the scale. Then when you're ready to make the cut, you plunge the saw to that depth, with the blade returning back when the cut's finished. An obvious benefit is that you can make the cut in the middle of a board for a sink cut out in a kitchen worktop, for example. Plunge saws tend to be safer too because the blade is only exposed while you're making the cut, and because the blade is enclosed, dust collection is much better than on a circular saw as well. So entry-level saws have crept up in price, but around the £100 mark or a little bit more, we'll see plenty of choice. But as I said before, there's been a bit of a change in the types of saw we're seeing on the market now. Back when I first started looking at them, budget saws were all this sort of pattern. There was the Screwfix Titan, there was the Macallister that came along, Triton at a much higher price point, but all very much out of the same mold. The recent cordless Rutland saw too is the same overall type, very similar to the Wen cordless saw as well that's available in the US. These days the Titan saw is long gone, the Macallister much harder to find, and the Triton now priced at well over £200 without guide rails. And the much more common pattern of saw at the budget end is now this style, originally by Einhell, I think, and made popular by Parkside. Most of the budget saws I've seen are currently of this style, which can present us with a bit of a problem when it comes to guide rails. And I do recommend that you take a look at the recent guide rail roundup video, as there's a certain amount of crossover between these two. By the way, if these just look like saws to you, don't worry, I'll show you a couple of things to look out for that'll give you a good idea of which one you're actually looking at if you're just looking at pictures of them on a website. As I said before, there's a lot of saw brands at the budget end of the market. Parkside, Einhell, Rutland's, XL, Lumberjack, Silverline, Draper are just some of them. I've had the Parkside for a little while, the Einhell and Rutland saws I bought when I did the guide rail video, and recently the XL saw to compare. And by the way, I bought the XL instead of the Lumberjack because the Lumberjack was out of stock. And I've got to say that studying the photos and specs on the website, they do look very, very similar. And in fact, all the current saws at the budget end look like they've come out of the same factory, which in turn suggests that they're probably going to do a very, very similar job in normal use, like cutting sheets of plywood or MDF. I think you could pick up pretty much any one of them and guarantee a decent result. Now I'm just going to talk through the four saws that I have here and point out the differences between them because they're pretty subtle. But before I do, just let me show you the things that distinguish these saws from the older Titan, Triton, Macallister design saws. So firstly, there's the overall shape. The Titan is squarer, the Einhell is more sloped towards the back. The second thing to notice is the handle. The Einhell pattern saws have this lever set into the top handle, often picked out in another colour, so it's quite distinctive. So if you see that, it's almost certainly to be one of these styles of saws. The lever is for blade changes. You lift the lever up, then plunge the saw and it locks in position. Be aware that the spindle doesn't lock, there's another little button in there for that. And all these styles of saws work in the same way. On the Titan style saws, there's a separate selector switch for this and a similar spindle lock arrangement. There's a few other things too, but the main difference between the older Macallister type saws and the Einhell or Parkside is the guide rails that you can use. Guide rails or tracks are an essential part of a plunge saw, and as I said in the recent guide rail video, another length of track or two is often the first purchase that a new track saw user will make. The Titan, Triton, Macallister and Rutland's cordless saws all use the tried and tested Makita pattern guide rails. This is very similar to the Festool rail, but with an anti-tipping lip added to the T-slot on the left-hand side. Now, for whatever reasons, Parkside, Einhell, Rutland's, XL, and I'm assuming the Lumberjack, Silverline, Draper, and so on too, they all make their saws with a slightly wider base plate. This works fine with the guide rails that comes with the saw, as they often have, or mostly have, this open sort of C shape at the left-hand edge. Another sure sign that you're looking at these styles of saws, by the way. But it means that these saws aren't compatible with the Makita pattern rails, as that little lip gets in the way of the wider base. That's important because the Makita pattern rails are the most widely copied, and it leads to some quite ludicrous situations. When I bought the XL saw, I also picked up an XL 1.5 meter guide rail, excellent value at just 40 quid. But hilariously, the XL saw won't run on this XL rail because this is a clone of the Makita rail. That's not unique to XL. The Rutland's corded plunge saw won't run on Rutland's 1.4 meter rails either for exactly the same reasons. And until very recently, this was a big problem for anyone buying one of these entry-level saws and wanting extra rails. Their choice was either to buy a Makita pattern rail and perform some surgery to trim off the lip. I've done a video about that, it's not actually that hard. Or to just bite the bullet and buy a Festool rail, which probably would have cost them more than the saw they've just bought. Fortunately though, we now have the option of the new Evolution G2 guide rails, the new ones with the grey strips, two 1.4 meter rails with the bag clamps, and what I think are the best joining bars around, on all for 100 quid. It is really very good value, and pretty much all the saws will work on these rails. Yes, it probably is more than you've just spent on a saw, but these rails are an investment that you can take forwards with you if you were ever to upgrade and move to a more premium saw. All right, let's quickly go through the four saws of this pattern that we have here and point out the differences. In fact, let's start with the similarities. They're all 240 volt mains corded saws with standard Makita sized 165mm blades. None of them will fit on Makita guide rails though, but they will fit on Festool and Evolution rails, and of course they'll fit the rails that come with the saws. The Parkside and Einhell both come with over 4 meters of mains cable. The XL and Rutland's only have 2 meters. The Parkside XL and Rutland's are only available as a complete bundle with two 700mm rails and joining bars. An additional 700mm rails are only available from Parkside. Those rails are compatible with the XL and Rutland saws, but they do have to be ordered from Germany. The Einhell is available as a bare saw, and the Einhell rails are available separately, but they are a unique pattern with two central ribs and a splinter guard on each edge. They'll only work with the Einhell saw, and they are only available in pairs of 1 meter lengths. Of these four saws, only the Parkside has a riving knife. Personally, for the kind of use that I'd expect these saws to be put to, I don't think a riving knife is that big of a deal, provided you keep your material flat and properly supported. But if it is important to you, then it's the Parkside or nothing. But the Parkside is only available here in the UK a couple of times a year, whereas the others are only limited by stock and availability. The Parkside cost about £75 and came with a 24 tooth blade and a pair of 700mm rails. I paid £85 for the bare Einhell saw and another 50 or so for the rails. Weirdly, it was cheaper to buy them separately than in a bundle, and the Einhell came with a nice 48 tooth thin curved blade. I paid about £105 for the XL saw in a package that was bundled with a 48 tooth Teflon coated blade in addition to the stock blade, plus a pair of 700mm rails, and I paid another £40 for the XL 1.5 meter rail that the XL saw won't work on, but that rail is great value if you're after a 1.5 meter Makita pattern rail. And finally, I paid £120 for the Rutland saw on sale, down from £180 they say that came with the stock 24 tooth blade and a pair of 700mm rails. I've just realised how much I've spent on this video. Don't skip the adverts. So with the saws all being so similar and the prices being so close, how on earth do you decide which of these to go with and which one would be my personal choice? Honestly, I think you could pick any of them and get a decent straight cut. When you dig into the specs, it all starts to get so personal about what's important to you. If you want the best price, then Parkside. If you want a riving knife, well, yeah, also Parkside. If you're happy to wait until spring when maybe they're back on stock, well, yeah, Parkside. The XL bundle with two blades is a well-priced option if you expect to want to use it for more finished cabinetry work as well. And the Rutland saw probably has the least appeal, as it's the highest priced of those three with no particular benefits over the XL, and both of those saws have the shortest mains cable, which is always a personal red flag. The Einhell is the slight outlier here. It's the most expensive saw with the bundled rails, but it's also the one that will give you the longest cut, 2 meters, using those rails. But if there's a full-sized sheet to be broken down in your future and you're considering additional rails, and that's often the reason for people to consider these saws in the first place, then the Einhell has a lot more appeal as a bare saw without rails, because you can take the 50 quid you save on those Oddball Einhell rails and put it towards the Evolution G2 rails. Yes, you're now spending £185, but you've got a pair of arguably the most compatible third-party guide rails around, and a really nice saw that comes with a great 48-tooth blade, is well made and has a good warranty. You'll also have the capacity to rip full sheets with just one join in the rails, and the convenience of a single 1.4 metre rail, not two joined 700s for those shorter cuts too, and all at only slightly more than the list price of the Rutland saw. As always, you pays your money and you make your choice, and there'll be a compromise or two along the way. If the Parkside ticks the boxes, whether that's price or the riving knife, then you'll have to wait until they're back in stock, and that's probably next year. If you've got £100 or thereabouts to spend and want something that'll get you up and cutting now, then your choice becomes narrower, but at least you have the choice. Or maybe you choose to look with sort of one eye to the future and pick up the bare Einhell saw at £85. And while you're waiting for your birthday money to come through for those Evolution rails, well, maybe you can make your guide rail of your own to use in the meantime. All these things are possible. Let me know in the comments if a DIY guide rail is something you'd like to see. But one of the reasons I like doing these budget tool videos is that the choice we have available to us now is quite extraordinary. We are genuinely in a golden age of power tool plenty. I've said it before and I'll say it again. I would have killed to have any of these saws at these kind of prices when I was first starting out. I will call this one done for this week though. Funny tracksaw story. Okay, 2009, a few years after the Festool patents had expired and long before we were getting any budget saws, when DeWalt and Makita were entering the plunge saw market, DeWalt started calling theirs a tracksaw in the US because it made it sound different. No slouch in the marketing department. Festool USA registered tracksaw.com and pointed it to the Festool USA website, where it still remains to that day. Put tracksaw.com into your browser and it'll go to Festool, not DeWalt. That's Streetfighter marketing at its finest. And on that hilarious note, I will call this one done for this week. Thanks so much for taking a look. Leave a comment, hit subscribe. Be sure to stay on track, and I'll see you in the next one. Take care.